035 60 60 973. Text 84850. Tweet at LBC.
Hello, very good afternoon to you. I'm Ian Dale. This is LBC. It's 4 minutes past 4. Coming up at 5, a dozen generals and senior military figures have said the UK's national interest would be best served outside the EU. Are they right? We'll be speaking to ex-Army officer and current Labour MP Dan Jarvis, who thinks they're wrong. Last night on BBC One, you may have seen a programme called The Last Whites of the East End. It's been denounced as racist propaganda. But doesn't that reaction demonstrate the problem? That even in 2016, we still can't discuss the problems of multiculturalism without resorting to throwing around accusations of racism. But next, it's Alex Salmond. And if you want to put a question to Alex Salmond over the next half an hour, the number is 03456060973. 973. You can also watch us on the LBC website at lbc.co.uk. Alec, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian.
Now, PMQs today was a bit of a B team, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, Cameron's away somewhere, so Osborne was filling in. Angle Eagle was doing the questions instead of Jeremy Corbyn. And last time I felt that happened, I thought she got the best of him. Other people didn't, but I did. Osborne looked a bit uncomfortable. This time he was heavily prepared with all his lines on Labour, and by and large it was a bit one-sided in Osborne's favour. Interestingly enough, he then ran straight into problems on a subject we had on the show last week, the Brain family from Dingwall, which he knew nothing about.
Well, we might come on to that a little bit later.
So understand, and it was quite interesting. I saw him look anxiously to, where's Theresa May? And she was whispering information. Of course, it's always the worst thing. And he was really bad on that, but he did well against Angle Eagle. Got caught amidships by Angus Robertson in the next question.
If you say so.
That's.
I didn't see it. So I'll take your word for it.
For me to say George Osborne did well in anything, it's like extracting teeth. Believe me.
Right. Well, let's see if we can extract a few questions from our listeners. 03456060973. Alex is here till 4:30. If you would like to ask him a question, let's get the show on the road. Shane is in Blackheath. Hello, Shane.
Hi, Ian.
Hi, what would you like to ask?
Hi, Mr. Salmond.
Hello, Shane, on you go.
Firstly, I would like to ask, Tony Blair yesterday said that we should actually send in troops to Syria. I'd like to get your thoughts about it.
Well, what he called for yesterday, and what looked like a classic Blairism, Campbellism tactic of getting your excuses in before Chilcot comes out, he actually called for what he called a proper ground war to defeat the so-called Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. So, not learning any lessons from blundering into Iraq in 2003, here is the man who is facing, in the Chilcot report, a denunciation of his actions, according to the leaks we've seen in the Sunday Times, in terms of misleading the country into an illegal war. Now, happily saying, my advice is send in the boys.
But he's
despite
right, isn't
the number of dead bodies, he is responsible.
He's right, because in Iraq there is a ground war. It's being conducted by the Iraqi army and the Peshmerga, and they are driving ISIS back. So whereas in Syria, that's what Tony Blair was talking about, what we need to do in Syria.
Well, he actually called for it in both. Which
it's happening in Iraq.
Well, yeah, but he didn't say that. I've got his quotes here. But, you would think that someone would learn something from the activities in the past. We're in the situation we're in at the present moment. Daesh is there because of the actions of Tony Blair and George W. Bush. Something he's almost admitted, incidentally. I mean, he actually said yesterday he knew much more now about the Middle East than he did when he ordered the troops
inevitable. Of course he does.
Inevitable.
Don't we all?
Well, or let's take it the other way. He didn't know what he was doing in 2003. This is totally incredible.
But your position is effectively a pacifist position, because what you're saying is because it all went wrong in Iraq, that means we must never ever send ground troops into a war ever again.
No, I don't have a pacifist position. I've supported military conflicts when they've been properly authorised by the United Nations.
And if this was?
Well, then, if you had a United Nations-backed coalition which had that bread for support, then, of course, you've got the basis for having an effective operation. If you don't have that and you have disunity, then you send our troops into a hellhole and a bloodbath.
I see that.
As Tony Blair seems to have totally failed to understand, it's not just winning the war, it's being able to establish the peace. And what he seemed to not understand all these years ago in toppling Saddam Hussein is it's not just a question of sweeping out a dictator. It's a question of how you run the country afterwards, which is why the emergence of Daesh is the collective responsibility of that man.
If we, and I know you'll say, well, you can't do this, but let's just pretend Iraq hadn't happened for a minute. If Daesh had formed, I know they did kind of form from Saddam Hussein's army, but just let me put this hypothesis to you. If Iraq hadn't happened and Daesh were committing the kind of atrocities that they are at the moment, do you not think there would be widespread support for what Tony Blair said? You can't rule out ground troops in any conflict, because if you do, you inevitably your sort of airstrikes are hamstrung.
Right. I supported the Allied coalition in Afghanistan. I supported the first Iraq war, which George Bush Sr. had a defined war aim, a broad coalition and a legal case resisting an invasion of another country. These engagements, in the first case, the first Iraq war was successful. In the case of Afghanistan, if they hadn't blundered into Iraq and totally taken their eye off the ball, could have been successful. But both these were based on impeccable international legal criteria, and with the broad enough coalition to be successful. These criteria do not apply currently.
But if
Syria.
they did?
Well, that would be a different case if they did, and I've given you the two citations from the past, but that is not the case now, which is why I've opposed what's being done in Syria at the present moment. Now, you mentioned the question of ground forces in Iraq. Yes, we have effective ground forces in Iraq, the Peshmerga for a start, and yet only yesterday in the House of Commons, at last, the Defence Secretary is saying we might give them some of the heavy weaponry that they need. That came up yesterday in the House of Commons. So we currently have a situation where we're selling arms to Saudi Arabia, who are committing what can be reasonably classified as war crimes in the Yemen, but we haven't as yet supplied the Peshmerga, the Kurdish forces, with the heavy stuff that they need to be a really effective ground force in Iraq. They've done wonders, incidentally, what they've got, but why the reluctance? Well, I'll tell you what the reluctance is, of course. It's our NATO ally, Turkey, who, of course, are sworn enemies of the Kurdish forces.
I hear what you say about Saudi Arabia. I'm no great fan of theirs, and they would no doubt deny that they're committing war crimes in the Yemen. But Tony Blair, again, yesterday, said, look, we have to realise that the Saudis are key allies in that region. You seem to think they're not. I mean, I know you've been to Iran, but presumably they haven't sort of...
Right. Can I say why, in my opinion, why Tony Blair made that speech? Why did he surface yesterday? Tony Blair wants you and I to be debating whether or not we should follow his advice in Syria, as opposed to be debating what we should be debating, him finally being called to account for his role.
Well, we can do that on July the 6th.
No, but I'm explaining why, because unfortunately I know this man like the back of my hand. I know every move he makes because I've been watching him for so long. That's why I made the intervention, and therefore even more important than the discredited Prime Minister's intervention and advice yesterday is what happened this morning in the House of Commons, where we started to reassemble the cross-party group of MPs who are determined, bearing in mind the evidence will have to be there in the Chilcot inquiry report, to hold Tony Blair to account for what he did all these years ago.
And according to the Sunday Times leak, it will be there. I mean, I don't know what you thought of that leak. I mean, there's a number of interpretations that you can make from it.
Well, the Sunday Times leak followed approximately what I'd been told a number of weeks ago, that the two key areas are going to be the pre-commitment, the commitment that Blair, I have always believed, gave to George W. Bush at Crawford Ranch in 2002, and secondly, the aftermath, the lack of planning, the activities and the events that took place after the toppling of Saddam Hussein, and these are going to be the key scathing areas of criticism. So what the MPs from across the parties this morning were looking at, and what their legal advisors that we're now consulting are saying, if that first issue is established, then what can be done to hold the former Prime Minister to proper account? Can it be done through domestic legal channels, which Jeremy Corbyn seems to be indicating he supports? Can it be done through international channels, through the International Criminal Court? Or do we have to go back to that procedure that we reinvigorated 10 years ago, the process of impeachment at the bar of the House of Commons?
I mean, if he was taken to the International Criminal Court, or indeed the bar of the House of Lords, and he was found guilty, what would his punishment be?
Well, that's a matter. I mean, look, I'm determined to hold Mr. Blair to account. The people,
let's
the people
have Judge Salmond. What punishment would Judge Salmond have done?
I'm not the judge, or for that matter, alone. That
well, you kind of are, because you have prejudged him already, haven't you?
Well, let's call me more the prosecuting.
We'll call you prejudge Salmond.
No, let's call me the prosecuting attorney, and he'll get his say. And no doubt, knowing Tony Blair, that'll be a fairly long say.
But I think believe him to be guilty, so therefore you must have some idea of what his punishment ought to be.
Well, let's go back, Ian, to say why I believe him to be guilty. If Chilcot establishes what I've always believed, what he's always contested, that he pre-committed to war come what may, then everything that happened subsequently flowed from that commitment. That's why the evidence was manufactured to suit his case. If that's the case, then he's certainly got a huge case to answer, and therefore a process, whether it be a criminal process in this country, a criminal process through the ICC, or a process of parliamentary impeachment, will hold him to account and determine the penalty.
What's the possible punishment under parliamentary impeachment?
Well, the Parliament can effectively do what it likes when somebody is discredited. I mean, the impeachment process, in my view, is a resort if you cannot get a criminal process properly underway. Jeremy Corbyn seems to think there is a criminal process. The ICC is also a possibility.
Well,
that's why the cross-party group of MPs are meeting. We are determined to hold them to account.
Well, on the day that Chilcot is made public is a Wednesday, so we will no doubt be discussing that on July the 6th in this very studio.
I think I get the families are getting 2 hours, to see a report which is twice as long as War and Peace, and that would probably be the opportunity I'm given as well, locked in a room with no mobiles.
Well, don't forget you can watch us live on the LBC website at lbc.co.uk. Let's go to another call. Patricia is in, I don't know how you pronounce this, but she's in Spain. Hello, Patricia.
Hello.
Javier.
Marvellous. Javier. Excellent.
What's your question, Patricia?
I'd like to ask Mr. Salmond whether he agrees with the court ruling that expats should be unable to vote on the EU referendum.
I don't agree with it, Patricia, because of the specific circumstances. Now, I have to confess, I didn't have expats voting in Scotland. But I'll tell you why that was the case, Patricia, because I couldn't establish an electorate in the Scottish case. For example, let's say I'd said everybody born in Scotland. Then I would have got people saying, well, listen, I was born in Aldershot because my dad was a Scottie in the Scots Guards. And therefore I couldn't establish an electorate. Therefore, the only electorate I could establish was the one used for the Scottish Parliament elections. Every Scottish Parliament elections is people resident in Scotland. Now, the reason I think the expats have a case is when you come to a general election in the UK, then expats, under certain rules, have the ability to vote. I also believe...
No, that's not true.
Under certain rules...
No, you can only vote if you have lived abroad under 15 years. In Spain. I don't know...
Yeah. And that's the rule. So if you live over 15 years, you can't vote. Quite reasonable.
Yeah. So that's the rules I'm talking about, Patricia. So expats have... But I also believe that there is a case for citizens voting in a constitutional referendum about the UK and the
EU. Even if they've lived abroad for more than 15 years?
Yes, because their citizenship will be affected by the result of the referendum.
No, it won't. They'll still be citizens of this country. They
will still be citizens of the UK, but their ability to reside in the rest of Europe will be under question. They have the ability, Patricia can correct me if I'm wrong, but I take it you're still a UK...
Do you ever come to Spain? Spain would, on the costers, believe me, Spain within 6 months would be bankrupt if the expats went. And not just the British expats, it would affect all the Germans. I know, because I know all not all. I know many Germans, many North Europeans that live here. If the property market went, their property value would go. There's 1 million unoccupied homes here.
So you think that there's no possibility of Spain ejecting all of the expats?
No, but I was explaining. I thought I was supporting you, Patricia, and your right to vote. I'm explaining that the reason I believe that expats should have the right to vote because some expats in some countries' ability to have residence in the rest of the European Union could be affected by the decision that's made.
Let's move on. Thank you very much, Patricia. Jane is in Coulston. Hello, Jane.
Hello.
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 What would you like to ask?
I'd like. Oh, hello, Alex.
Hello, Jane.
Hello. I'd like to ask if you agree with Harriet Harman in that women are being marginalised from the discussion about the EU.
I think it's the case. She has a point in most of the key spokespeople on both sides of the debate seem to be men. And therefore I thought it was incredibly refreshing that we had the lineup of Leanne Wood from Plaid Cymru, the Green Party Member of Parliament, and Nicola Sturgeon making a progressive case for the European Union earlier this week, because that was a lineup of three influential, interesting women making a case. But if you take that apart, then most of the people who are the major protagonists in the EU debate.
Well, on the Remain side, you're right. On the Leave side, there are quite a few. Admittedly, that you may not think they're on the same scale as Boris Johnson or Michael Gove. You've got Priti Patel, Andrea Leadsom, Penny Mordaunt, Suzanne Evans, Gisela Stewart, Kate Hoey.
But I said the main protagonists seem to be men, but I'm not saying they're exclusively men. But I think there's a bit of a case in what Harriet Harman was saying. But I'm pointing out that these three very progressive, very interesting women made what I hope is going to be the nature of the Remain campaign for the rest of this campaign, a progressive and positive case for staying in the European Union, as opposed to some of the nonsensical scaremongering that we've seen today.
You're doing an EU debate tomorrow, I think, on the BBC. Are there any women involved in that?
Yes, there's the lady from UKIP, the one that Nigel Farage keeps expelling.
No, that's Suzanne Evans.
Oh, that's another one.
I think it's Diane James that's on with you.
In that case, Diane will be.
She hasn't been expelled yet.
She hasn't been expelled yet. Well, we'll give her time. Right, if she's good, then she'll be expelled by Nigel.
Let's move on. Natalie is in Ruislip. Hello, Natalie.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I just wanted to ask Mr. Salmond that do you think we've been discussing about a decline of religious belief in this country? Do you think that could be because we're so tolerant and trying to be so politically correct of accepting other religious beliefs that we've watered down the belief of this country?
I don't think so. I think it's much more to do with the nature of modern society, the lack of a community anchor for what people do, the fact that people move about, people are much more rootless, much less community focused. I think that many religions are very, very community based. And of course, you can say, Natalie, that many of our new communities are actually very religious. I mean, for example, mosque going among Muslims will be much higher than church going among Christians. I think that the effect of having a more diverse community is certainly not to make it irreligious or to have a decline in established religion. I think the decline in the Christian denominations, not all of them by any means, but the decline that we're seeing in trying to pin me, Natalie, at the present moment. I'm an irregular churchgoer.
Okay.
When was the last time you went?
I'm a Christian and I converted from Hinduism. But what I'm saying is that I think that it's abnormal now to be a Christian and to go to church and to talk about God. Whereas we're looked upon like as if we're strange. Whereas I think if you're Muslim or you're Hindu, that's okay. So I think the society has done that. I think the government has done that because like a lot of stores are not allowed to say Merry Christmas. They say season's greetings. They don't want to offend. So I think that the society and the government have allowed that to happen. Whereas if you were to go to some of these Muslim countries, they haven't watered down their religion. They're being very strong in what they're doing. So this country needs to bring back the religion of this country.
Right, okay. Natalie, I the week before last Christmas, right, I was in the centre of Tehran in the Espinasse Hotel in the centre of Iran. I walked in, there's a giant Christmas tree with a huge banner saying Merry Christmas. That was in the centre of downtown Tehran in Iran last Christmas. Straight, the view.
But it's one of
by
the most
majority.
intolerant countries on earth, isn't it?
Well, certainly there wasn't an intolerance of Christmas in Tehran last Christmas, and I can vouch for that because I was there and didn't see any intolerance. What I did see was a giant Christmas tree and celebration.
Did you meet any gay Iranians while you were there?
I didn't meet any gay Iranians, but I met a number of Christian Iranians who were part of the Christian MPs in the Majalis.
Oh, I forgot, sorry, there are no gay people in Iran. As we were told by Ahmadinejad.
I don't approve of intolerance against gay people in any country, anywhere, any time. But we wouldn't have to look very far and very far back, Ian, to see substantial intolerance against gay people in this country, something which I'm proud to say as First Minister of Scotland through the equal marriage legislation I tried to do something about.
Well, we could talk about that for a long time, but we're not going to, because I want to get an update on the deportation case that we discussed on the show last week, Alex. Now, here was some of the exchange from the House of Commons, in the House of Commons, Angus Robertson and the Chancellor, George Osborne.
What does the Chancellor have to say to the Brain family and the community who want them to stay?
Well, as I understand it, the family don't meet the immigration criteria, but the Home Secretary says she's very happy to write to the Right Honourable Gentleman on the details of the specific...
Frankly, is not good enough.
Well, as I say... Can I make a suggestion to the Scottish National...
You said he performed quite well, apart from this question.
Arrested out of their home next Tuesday. And you cannot treat that as if it's political argy-bargy.
Well, I think we can now speak to Catherine Brain. Good afternoon, Mrs. Brain.
Hello, Ian. How are you?
I'm very well. What did you make of that exchange in the House of Commons there?
I can't quite describe the disappointment and anger I'm feeling, actually. I really do feel like that the Chancellor has just, effectively washed his hands of us. The letter he's promising may not come in time for us for next Tuesday. That's the thing we're really concerned about. We need action happening today.
So you sound to me as if you're kind of losing a little bit of hope.
Not losing hope, but certainly very disappointed in the response, yes.
Alex, can you give Mrs. Brain a little bit of a crumb of comfort from what's happened today?
Well, Catherine, hello again. I think the government are under a lot of pressure on this. And I think I understand you're at a community distillery in the hills above Dingwall at the present moment. Maybe tell us a bit about developments this afternoon.
Well, this is it. As a result of, not maybe as a result, but certainly with the continuing pressure that Alex, we have been overwhelmed since last week, since my husband was on the phone to you. We've been contacted by Glenwithers Distillery. In fact, we had intended to be one of the community shareholders ourselves had we got to stay, and we're hoping that will still be the case, in that we will get for myself. Now, which the share closing is at 24th of June. It would fit perfectly with the qualifications
Catherine's handed the phone to him. John, thank you for having a word with us. I mean, obviously you were deeply touched by what's happened to the Brain family. Just tell us why you've offered her this.
We've got 750,000.
To Catherine for also coming on the phone. We're going to keep you up to date with this. We did it for Myrtle Cothill. Let's see if, Alex, we can do it for the Brains.
Listen, there was a great vignette this morning. I saw in another programme, I saw Catherine and Greg and young Lachlan being interviewed, and Lachlan yawned, as a 7-year-old does, in the middle of the interview, which was absolutely fantastic.
Well, let's have no yawning from our final caller, Connor, who's in Glasgow, where I've just come back from today. Hello, Connor.
How's it going?
Not too bad. What would you like to say?
Well, it's about the EU referendum. I'm on an enviable position of supporting independence for Scotland and supporting Louise's campaign for United Kingdom to leave.
Which is entirely logical, I would have thought, but there we go.
Yeah, I had the same arguments that I'd done in 2014, and I'm getting some people telling me that's wrong, but in the same case, they support independence. But the question really is around the SNP. I'm an SNP supporter. And is there a single councillor, MSP or MP that is anti-independence?
Well,
but also...
Yeah, absolutely right. And you've got a good point there. But I don't think we should have our policy dictated by, the back number of ex-president himself in 2014. I don't.
What about the ex-deputy leader of the SNP, Jim Sillars?
Well, I was just going to come to that. We had a debate at the National Council on Saturday on this very subject. Although it was pretty overwhelming, it wasn't unanimous. It was a debate. Can I say one thing? I wonder. Andrew to the Hanseatic League, which was the kind of medieval across Europe in Lubeck, saying, look, times have changed, we're back in charge, Scotland is once again open for business with the rest of Europe.
So Jim Sillars is completely wrong?
People are never completely wrong. But
well,
I disagree.
He says you're living in a parallel universe.
I disagree on the subject. The mere point I'm trying to establish is if you trace right through 1,000 years of Scottish history, out of. I was very disappointed in David Cameron. I mean, after denouncing Donald Trump and calling him everything, he says, oh, well, I will meet him even if he's just a candidate. Now, I accept if in the awful day that Donald Trump became President of the United States, you'd have no choice but to meet the office. But you don't have to meet a Republican candidate. There's no requirement.
Well, I mean, I interviewed David Cameron last Thursday, and he's clearly going soft on doing that.
He's going soft, yeah. That's exactly what he's doing. He's going soft.
So
he's made of jelly.
If Donald Trump comes to Scotland as part of his tour in July or August, that Nicola Sturgeon shouldn't meet him?
She won't.
She won't meet him.
I know Nicola Sturgeon, I know Donald Trump, and I know she won't.
Can't get much more categoric than that. We'll see you again soon. Alex, thank you very much indeed. After the news and travel, we're going to be talking about TV presenter Julia Bradbury, who reckons her children like spending more time with their nanny than they do with her. Has that got a familiar ring to it with you? 0345 6060 973. I'm Ian Dale. This is LBC. It's 4:35. News headlines with Ros Unwin.